I will hand this over to Jim Childress, partner at Centerbrook Architects, and he will introduce Robert.
Thanks, Ann. Hi, Robert. Thank you so much for doing this. A few comments about Robert. He graduated from Ball State University, the degree in architecture and environmental design. And he is a principal of Bohlin, Cywinski, Jackson in their Seattle office. They have, I think, 6 offices around the country. He's a fellow of the American Institute of Architects in Design. And I like this one, a member of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. That sounds really very cool. And he's been a long-term member of the National AIA Committee on Design, the American Institute of Architects Committee on Design, and sitting on its advisory board for, I think, just about all of those 10 years. I've been fortunate to get to know Robert over the last 10 years, and I was thinking about just a couple observations I could pass on to you, because he's going to talk about houses today, but maybe just a little bit, sort of 3 things I think I've learned from him. I think creative problem solving drives him. It's not so much the size, the type of a commission. It's more about solving problems creatively. I learned that he went to Seattle with Peter Bohlin to design Bill Gates's house when he was younger. That's how he got there. And then, of course, they needed work after they finished that big house. And how do you convince other people to hire you? You want a variety of things. You want small houses, but you've done Bill Gates' house. How can you get something that we could do, that we could afford? And he learned how to work that. He managed to land a small library on a very small budget and did a beautiful job with it, melding it into nature. I've seen pictures of it. And that led to more really cool libraries like the Ballard Library and the fire stations, and then more houses, engineering schools and high rises and the like. So just built on that just because he was good at creatively solving problems. I think the other thing that strikes me about Robert is he's tireless. He's far from boring, and he's got a great sense of humor, which I think will come through tonight, but he's always thinking about architecture. His wife told me he sleeps under his desk sometimes. I don't know whether that's true or a metaphor, but I've always wondered if he's got a cot under there, but always going. And the last one is, I mean this affectionately, he's a gearhead. He loves cars and machines and how to make things work. And that has led to custom designing hardware. He came up with this really cool way to take a column at a corner and tie it into a roof that's doing this. And he's got this universal gear learning from cars that makes that work all the way through this building. It's got kind of a potato chip roof. I'm sure he'll talk about it tonight, doing sustainability in buildings that actually works. So I think that side of him is a real asset to what he does. So those are my big 3 observations about Robert. I look forward to seeing what he has to say. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you, Jim and Ann. Yeah, it was very kind, but I hope I live up to that in my career. So I really appreciate you inviting me here to the Centerbrook series, and thank you also to the Essex Library for hosting this. So the focus today, I was going to chat about a few of our projects, and I titled it Solace from Home. Given the current situation, I thought it might be interesting to go back and look at a few of our projects and see how they're living up in 2020, given all the current challenges. And it's been quite interesting. I started putting together a slide presentation, and I noticed that a lot of our architectural photography was, especially for the residential work, did not have people. And suddenly the perception of that changed for me. So where I saw, kind and friendly architecture, suddenly I saw it as being empty and a little void. So I took it upon myself to call a few of my friends, past clients, and ask them for just a few snapshots from their iPhones that I could fill in just some of the blanks. And I was telling Ann and Jim, I was surprised at how many images I received, and I'm still continuing to receive those. So they just keep pouring in, and it's fun to see how they've adapted to the changing hairstyles and the growing kids. So as we all are, they're adapting and quite happy. it also occurred to me that there's sort of a correlation between architecture and recently, our last gathering as an office was in an event space that had a pyramid diagram of the Maslow happiness diagram, talking about sort of the basic needs of people and then elevating up through to self-actualization. And it seemed architecture follows that pretty succinctly. And it seemed like there were some of those categories of security and um, some of the privacy, social aspects that were changing in our current times. So it was interesting to see how our clients were adapting to those. So the first project I thought I would share with you is in Whistler. It's a ski area. We have just an amazing client, a family that lived in London, and they purchased a lot high on the mountain, and it had been already developed into a gravel pad. So we met them and talked about their desires and realized that they really love nature and the outdoors, and that's why they wanted to be there. So we developed a scheme where we created a lawn area where the gravel was. We located the house around the edges and then created these volumes of living room, dining room, kitchen, bedroom. But each one had a very specific view to different peaks around the mountain range. So the interesting thing is it's now carved into the stone. So all of the site that was destroyed by man is now in the center courtyard as a lawn, and the house creates an edge to the existing rockeries around the site. But there's an amazing sense of security as you arrive. Being overseas, they like that. But through the arrival or aperture, you came into that lawn area, and that was an area for the kids to play and to have this sort of flat area. We also have an amazing rows of aspen in there, so the changing colors, which we can appreciate this time of year, is at one edge. The apertures that you see, those cannons, light cannons, bring light down into the lower levels. One of them during a solstice hits the wine cellar, which is kind of a fun festival throughout the year. And the house wraps around. We have a tension cable stairway, which just changes as you move through the space from solid to a negative, which leads you to the upper levels. And then all of that is threaded around that courtyard, but then filtering off of that is those spaces that we referred to. So this is the family area with the fireplace, tied to the barbecue area and some outdoor swimming pool areas. Light being brought through the roof at each of the fireplace masses here in the living room. Extending out onto the deck, we had some reclaimed timber, so we created a mass timber deck that extends out into the air towards the trees. This is a Capofari window system for the Architects Online, which was an Italian company who did just extraordinary stainless steel system with enormous openings, which make that connection to the outdoors. The family, of course, loves being on that deck. It's that sense of being above everything and almost like a flying sensation. And the family's been able to gather there. During COVID, they had the unique experience of being able to spend 6 straight months there. So while previously they'd been sort of coming and going, they now are able to really enjoy thoroughly the seasons there. The bedroom, master bedroom, has just an amazing view, almost a 180 view, but also privacy. You cannot see any other houses from this particular location, even though there's adjacent lots. If you could go by an aerial photo, you would see other houses, but when you're on the site, you think you're in the middle of nowhere. The swimming pool itself is cantilevered out as a concrete volume reaching out into the trees, similar to the decks. That was the first thing that we built on the house as we worked our way off the site. So we started the far end of the site, started the swimming pool, and worked our way backwards towards that entryway that we saw in that first slide, where you're sliding between stones. So the family has been enjoying that, as I said. The swimming pool especially has been a great feature. So they're able to use it year round. When they travel, we're able to pump the water into a cistern below and keep it dry. So it's available pretty quickly. We were able to blast through this stone ledge. It's one of the few places where we affected the stone with the architecture. So we had some amazing blasters come in, and they would drill holes and set off a charge and take off little lenses until we got through the stone. Meanwhile, everybody was biting their nails, hoping that the right pieces would fall off and not the wrong ones. So it sisters through rather cleanly through the rock. It has a glass end to it, and then it drops down, so there's a lower railing, so you really get that sense of an infinity edge, but still meeting the security that we needed for code. The clients enjoy the outdoors. They're just avid outdoors people, so it's fun to follow them on Instagram and see what they're up to, but things that I would never do in my lifetime. Just an amazing, daring venture, it seems like every day. The second project I thought I would share with you is in Honolulu. So going to a warmer climate. Again, just an amazing family who purchased a piece of land. They moved from LA to Honolulu, and they had Japanese roots. So they approached us and asked us if we were able to make a home that would merge their Japanese heritage with a Hawaiian beach house. So we really loved that challenge. They had two lots that almost touched each other. They were separated by a surf access. So there's interesting challenges there. But in meeting them, they're both artists. They have a son and a daughter who are just an amazingly creative group. And they wanted both residence and a studio. So we started with the residence first. And as part of their art, at the moment, they were casting fruits and vegetables in ceramics and porcelain. And so they wanted a area where they could grow vegetables and fruits to use in their artwork. And during the process, that sort of evolved. So they also loved cooking. So when we did the house, they said, well, let's add a little bit of greenery to the house. And this was late in the game. So we said, well, let's bring in some urban agriculture folks and we can talk about what the possibilities are. And we discovered that there was a gentleman on the island that was doing these tubes of soil. So it was like a sock, and it would come to the site filled with your planting soil. And then you would cut little X's and put in your plants and it would grow. And it was required a little bit of irrigation, but it was pretty much self-contained. And we were able to put those on the roof with the design that we had with a little bit of extra structure. So just below the banyan tree limb here, you'll see on the lower roof some greenery, and that's all planted garden. So it was amazingly lush. Even when it was first planted, they were starting to harvest so much vegetables and fruits that the kids started a service delivering them to their neighbors in the neighborhood. So it started building this amazing community in their early years on the site. And it's continued to thrive. It's continued to expand. In the second building, in the studio, we've actually planted orchards and created an aquaponics to raise fish. And they've created a little farm, essentially, between the two sites. So for the aquaponics, they actually, one of the early times that we were meeting for the studio, which is the second phase, we met on site in the house. And the owners made us an amazing dinner, and it was all things off the roof, all vegetables and fruits off the roof. So that led to the discussion of how we could expand into the studio. And this aquaponics system seemed to be a great way to add just another layer to their cooking as far as available meat and produce. So here is their son doing a little bit of fishing for dinner out of their aquaponics system. And then you'll see the angled supports which allow us to grow various plants up the side of the building. So it continues to get lush. And then in the background is the orchard. So in the house, we have an amazing kitchen with a great view, but it's designed to support the entire family. So even while the kids were young, we designed in appliances that could pop up out of the cabinetry to multiple levels. So they were able to learn to cook from a young age. And the entire family is just, they're amazing hosts. So they oftentimes have guests over. And we've been the benefit of that many, many times, which I'm pleased to say. But in the current times, it's interesting. They're doing a lot of cooking. They're also learning from home. So the kids are in school, but they also have tutors that come to the house and work with them. So this is outside their living room on the lanai. So what a great place to learn as a kid. So it's open air, so they're able to remain healthy and deal with their small community group. So in the meantime, the owners, the parents, are able to enjoy the garden as it's thriving. So they've created what they've called, as a joke for myself, I guess, is their little beer garden. So we all share a love, and I think Ann and I share as well of beer. And so they go up there and hang out and enjoy the view, and they're able to harvest, especially herbs and such for dinner. So they're continuing to make these amazing meals. They've gone through several different different types of cooking, from pure vegetarian to paleo diets, and so they keep experimenting and changing what they do. But they've also started photographing that again to expand their art world. And I don't have a lot of their artwork in, but they're doing ceramics. The family's doing weaving together. They do a lot of painting. They have a philanthropic group that does education for kids. So that's been an amazing attribute for the community. So the interiors, I think, is a pretty interesting thing. We have these sliding doors that will roll back, and they'll gradually expand and expose different parts of the house. So one of the things that we observed about Japanese culture when we'd worked overseas was there was a modesty, and I could see that in our owners. They had an amazing collection of art, both personal and friends, but they were, as I say, quite modest about it. So we created these soji screens that you could conceal the kitchen with the soji screen, and then you could slowly open those almost as a theatrical event when they were entertaining. And as the doors open, you would also expose more and more of the artwork. So during dinner, not only had you the connection to the kitchen, but you had the artwork to surround, and they really enjoyed talking about objects and artwork. So in its full open mode, you can see the connectivity between the dining room and the kitchen, and then also out to the lanai, where we can just open up the entire window system and spill out to those spaces. One of the things I like about the house is the connection to the ocean front, really taking advantage of this site. The site's history was, it was one of the old fishing ponds in Hawaii for the natives. So this house, or location for this house, was an old caretaker shack for the fish ponds, and it was in quite poor condition. We had the opportunity to stay there when we first visited the island. So we, Peter Bohlin and myself, went and wanted to stay on the site if possible. We do that whenever we can. And so they scrambled and borrowed a bunch of mattresses. And there were 3 of us hanging out in the house for a week at a time, just understanding the breezes and the views and what the site had to offer. And what we ended up with was one of the attributes was these curved timbers. So they have very soft eased edges and these curved ends. And for us, it sort of mimicked the banyan trees, which were so lovely on the site. There were these 2 ancient banyans. But as I mentioned earlier, there's also this surf access that went down between the two sites. And in order to make friends with the surfers, our clients had this great inspiration to put in a hot and cold shower near the walkway. So the surfers would come out and they would take a quick shower and stand there and sort of watch the construction of the site. And one of them observed that these timbers for them really looked like outriggers for an outrigger canoe. So everybody has their own perception, but I think it creates an amazing soft space. So that edge is a great performance space for the family. They can entertain. This is the side facing the ocean, so the master bedroom above with a separate surf stair that brings you down to the shoreline. And from the master bedroom, they have their own quiet space, so especially in times like these where you want a little bit of separation. It's one of the spaces that, even though it's largely open, they have a quiet contemplative space to escape to. So the SOGI screens also continue to the outside. So here you see a white panel that can slide to conceal the cars near the front entryway. And it's aligned with the spine of the building, which also has the screens on the interior of the building. So there's this sort of movable pattern of wheeled screens down through that spine. The other thing that I thought was quite innovative is we decided to flip the beams to the top of the roof. So again, the architects might pick up on this, but the columns come up in between the joists and they're hitting a beam that's above the roof, which conceals that planted area. And then all of the joists are hung off of that. So we get these really clean lines out through the window wall system, out to the lanai and to the lawn. So the one thing that we didn't really plan on, I have to admit, but that we've adapted to is the SOGI screens being used for film night. So they're able to invite all of their friends over. The kids can have friends and socially spaced and watch movies in the evening, which has been an incredible relief for them, especially, as I say, in these current times of 2020. So we have a photographer that we worked with, and I mentioned some of his amazing work, which we convinced him not to put people in the residential images, but he does put people in our public images and does this tremendous job and has a stellar eye. And we were chatting with him one day and he mentioned that he had purchased a lot in Point Roberts. And Point Roberts is here in Washington State. It's a little peninsula of land that comes down below the Canadian border. So from Seattle, you would drive up through Bellingham, north of the border, through a border crossing. And then you come back through a border crossing to Point Roberts through the Bohlin border crossing. So it's almost like a small gated community. So for 2020, it was deemed as one of the safest places in the US because it was so constrained and isolated by the border station and such a small population that they had almost a zero COVID incidence. So but we helped Nick build a house there. He asked us if we would help him, and we were delighted to work with somebody that had such an exposure to architecture and an interest in doing something interesting there. He had a very tight budget. So what we did is we tried to find a simple way of building for him, of capturing the views of the forest on his site, but also minimizing the amount of materials, both from a modernist standpoint, but also as an expression of the tectonics, which he really appreciated in our work. So we created a system that used all off-the-shelf members, all 2x members or 4x members. And then we did some research and we found Milgard windows, if you got larger units, they got cheaper by the square foot. So we ended up laying out a system that was essentially our 4-foot modules for the grid of the building. We created this framework and then infilled it as much as we could with glass in the appropriate places, and created what we call the light box. So the owner, Nick LaHoo, at the time was single. He since has gotten married and has a beautiful daughter who's loving staying in Point Roberts and exploring. Because the community is so safe, they had been living in Vancouver, But they found in Point Roberts, she can basically hop on her bike and go explore, and it's such a safe neighborhood that it works. And I don't think they could do that in other communities. So we've had the delight of watching her grow up and explore things, everything from a slug farm that she showed us one day to time on the beach, building shacks on the beach. And so her exposure to architecture has been quite interesting. We recently did a second project for Nick, which is at the tail end of this, where she actually was a bit of a supervisor. So she's really come up through the ranks. So the house is a fairly open plan, a fairly simple rectangle. You enter along a spine of the building. So you have a dining room, kitchen, living room, a pretty basic plan. And then to the left, you have a stairwell that takes you up to the upper levels with a master bedroom, a children's bedroom, and a loft. But the living room is at the terminus closest to the forest. So you approach through the dining room end, and you end in this two-story space with full views of sort of immersive views of the forest. And I always likened it to building a treehouse as a kid. That's sort of the feel that it gave me, at least. And Nick really loved the site. He loved camping on the site. He and his now wife had built a couple of shacks that had no heat, no plumbing. They're just basic camping shelters, so very minimal. So he said he didn't want much more than that, but he wanted obviously utilities and to make the basic necessities. So we were able to keep it quite open and light. So the interesting thing about this space is how it adapts. So their daughter's able to have quiet time to study and relax. She can have her friends over, and they oftentimes have parties with neighborhood children. As I say, because the incidence there is so low, they're able to have gatherings even nowadays with quite a few of the neighbors. So they're sort of small community group. But they're also able to host some rather, I'd say, formal parties compared to most things in Point Roberts. So the space adapts. And I think that's interesting, how we make space that can serve multiple purposes, multiple uses, and be rather inventive about that opportunity for our clients. So I mentioned the stairwell that brings you from the lower level to the upper level. We really liked expressing that framework continuing through at a little bit finer grain. We felt it felt a little bit perhaps of Asian flavor, sort of a Japanese flavor coming up through with the fine grain and the inlaid plaster. At the top of this stairwell is a very small office, which Nick used just as a computer monitor in the early days. And then upstairs, you have a loft that gets that same view as the living room. And this is one of my favorite spaces. There's a glass railing that you can barely see in the foreground at the edge of the loft. And this now has bean bags laying around the floor. So it's this kind of a casual flop space where you can go up and read a book and just have a little bit of private time, but still be connected to the activities that are happening on the lower level through the acoustics. So the house is nestled in the woods. We used Svartjärden, which is a pine tar finish. It's sort of a Swedish finish, and it allows it to blend into the environment, but also a very natural finish, which was one of the criteria that Nick wanted to use. So we recently received some questions from some architects about it. So Nick did a quick little study for us because it's been 10 years since he built this. So he took a series of photographs showing the durability of the material, and we're sharing that with some of our friends, which has been great research. We like this thing just glowing. It seems to get thinner at night, much more transparent. It's been great for the family, as I mentioned. So while this was originally going to be a second home for them, and they were going to stay in the condo in Vancouver, it quickly became their preferred home. So they were spending more and more time. And now, with our current situation, of course, they decided it should be a full-time situation as much as possible. So it's seeing a lot of changes. One of the changes when they moved there full time was they realized that they really needed a little bit more space for Nick. So Nick asked if we'd be willing to do a very simple studio building. He described it as a simple dumb box, but he wanted to have it be similar in proportion to the main house, but keep it somewhat simple. We seem unable to keep things simple. So we devised in a series of that point, we were flying around on planes quite often, quite different today. But I would take a sketch pad with me on the planes, and each flight I would sketch a few more details of how we could build this little shed for him. And one of the things that we were exploring at the time was mezzanine structures and unistrut structures like you would see in Home Depot. So we decided to use that as our base for the building. So it's metal posts going into the ground. We have bars that bolt onto those, and they would normally be for pallets, but instead we're placing Nick's house on top of that. So we got to the point where we did a full set of documentation, but the contractor that Nick had lined up decided that he wasn't available anymore. So we called on our favorite project manager, Nick's daughter, and we told her that we'd be willing to help build it and give Nick a few extra hands. So we all decided that that was a good thing to do. And we mentioned it in the office, and suddenly we had a bunch of our interns, excuse me, expressing interest in being part of this. So we did some mock-ups in the office and had lots of really great discussions about natural materials, how they're not straight, how the rounded edges of a 2x4 look different if they're plain versus not when you put them side by side, how things fasten, how you would hide those fasteners. And so we did a diagram in Revit. We exploded all of the parts and pieces. We did cutting diagrams. So it was basically like building a model airplane. When we arrived on site, we were able to say we needed this many 2x4s cut to this length. And the volunteers all started doing their bits and pieces to make this happen. So one intern we had started building a small model, and he was building it just slightly ahead of what we were doing on site on the weekends. So it started off with a framing model, and then we slowly would add panels to it, and it would grow in complexity. And it was really useful, especially for the team, to really talk about where we're working at that moment and to site it on the property, et cetera. As Nick here is looking through to the main house to see what he's going to see when it's complete. So the team varied a bit, but this was the core team. Standing next to me is Cameron, who was sort of the most consistent and did amazing diagrams and thoughtfulness. He's now studying at UW, and we hope to have him back soon. We're not the best house guests. So this is Nick's living room again, which he gave us for accommodations. So if you were thinking of having us come build something for you, fair warning. So the studio building is now nearly complete. COVID slowed us down, so we're still lacking a little bit of casework, but Nick is able to utilize the space. He's able to see his daughter on the trampoline. He's able to see the main house. They can see him from the dining room. So his commute is quite short, but quite useful in sort of gaining a little bit of separation. Following that, we entered into a competition here in Seattle. They had a competition for a pre-approved Daydo unit, detached accessory dwelling unit. And in order to create more housing for the city, they alleviated some of the restraints or constraints about building in your backyard, size of properties, et cetera, increased the size of the units that were permitted. And then they reached out to architects to design a few units that they would pre-approve, that people would just come and pick up a permit. And they would then each of the architects would get a licensing fee. And then they may or may not continue with the project, or it may be given to another architect to follow through. But most likely they would continue. So we designed a unit, and we were really pleased that we were one of 10 to be accepted out of, I believe it was 160 entries. So there's 10 currently that the city is releasing as we speak. So it's on their city website. But it's basically, we saw it as 2 volumes in a larger volume, one for living, one for sleeping, and then a kitchen bar and a bathroom bar that came along one edge. And the thing I liked is we used the same modular system. So we were looking at mezzanine structures, so we could buy it off the shelf, bolt it together as a homeowner. And then we started looking at 8-foot long flexible units that people could purchase to put in the dwelling. And they could be for sleeping, they could be for dining, they could be for living, they could be a combination. So we designed a certain number of those. And then as part of the premise, we suggested that we would forego our licensing fee if the owner of a dwelling unit that's been built would help another unit, another owner build his unit. So we have this sort of shared knowledge base, but also this continuing built community between owners. So it's quite young. We've had 2 inquiries. It just went up live. So we're hoping that this will develop so we can continue to develop these internal units. So as owners have different needs for different cultural needs possibly, that we can then design additional units would become available on the website so people would go and select these. We're also talking to vendors who may be interested in building different units. So homeowners would be able to go to them, hopefully as a group through the website, and get a deal for maybe 6 units of a sleeping unit, or maybe 12 of a dining unit. So this section shows one case where we have a dining room table that folds up. You can fold down 2 bunk beds. You have sort of a study area, you can fold down a bed. So that was just one of the configurations. So it's primarily SIP panels with the metal frame inside on a post foundation, so it can adapt to different conditions around the city. And the size is quite small. It's 16 feet by 20 feet. So we have other scales, but the one that's pre-permitted is that size. We also found that during COVID, when it first started, we started looking at whether we could pressurize the house. So we actually adapted it to have 2 mechanical systems. So we could do a positive pressure on the front living area, negative on the bedroom area. So if somebody needed isolation, they could be in the bedroom. All of the air would be pulling through, so a caretaker could come in, use the living room as an office area, and have basically fresher air in that section. So it was interesting to start studying that at the beginning of this whole pandemic. So one of the other options, of course, is isolation. So the last project I wanted to share with you is called the Bear Stand. This was another client who was living overseas. It was a couple and their daughter, and they had the opportunity to purchase 100 acres of land in the Halliburton Highlands, which is, you basically go north from Toronto till you're lost and then take a right. And it's Lake Contau. It feels like it's in the middle of nowhere, but our client grew up there with his family camping on this site. His family has a few cabins, very small shacks located around the lake that they still utilize. And he wanted to build a home that they could come back and stay during the holidays. But it didn't make a lot of sense from a financial standpoint. So he came up with a great business plan, which I have to say, I told him I thought it might be a bit flawed, and I was pleasantly wrong. He wanted to create a luxury resort, a luxury escape. So he wanted a house that was large and gave people an experience of being in the Haliburton Highlands. And it was primarily focused on folks coming from Toronto that wanted to escape the city, or folks that are coming overseas that just wanted to experience something unique. So we started designing this home at the edge of the lake. And it's really tucked away, as I say. You would swear you're in the middle of nowhere. The first thing they did is we hiked the 100 acres. We created a trail system, so we put markers out as we walked around and explored the site and looked for a place for the house to be positioned. We discovered a mud lake, which we knew from a map was there, but apparently nobody had visited for many years because it was so isolated. So we were able to open up a trail system using a gentleman who specializes in that. In the winter, he went back and built a little dock on Mud Lake, which is now part of the compound, for canoeing. And then we started construction on this wonderful little house. And the ultimate outcome, you arrive at the house. It's tucked into the hillside. There's a cliff of stone to your right-hand side, and the lake is off to the left. And then as you wrap around the lakeside, the house becomes 2 stories. And this lower left corner is a screened-in porch. While we were camping there, we discovered that there are mosquitoes in the Haliburton Highlands, and they're quite thick. So many of our trips up there, we would always camp in tents with the client. It was a great way to explore the site. As I say, we love camping or being on a site any way possible, just to understand it. We learned a lot about them. We learned a lot about the history of the site and its importance to the family. But as I say, we also learned which bug sprays work the best. So we created a screened-in area in the lower level, and then we have a living room, a 2-story living room, a dining room that comes out into an area that's glassed in that can be opened up to the air, and then a small guest room on the lower level. And then the upper level of the bedrooms, the master bedroom, a wonderful bathroom suite, children's bunk rooms, and another bedroom. The living room uses native stone. So our client was great at using his contacts from childhood to locate really quality craftspeople and materials that we wouldn't have found without his knowledge. And we created this gathering space in the core of the project. And as I say, it comes alive. They rent it out as a bed and breakfast now, and it's been incredibly successful. So they have a great social media following, and people are traveling or were traveling from all over the world to stay here, including folks coming up from Toronto, but a much wider and diverse audience than I ever would have anticipated. And the comments we receive back once in a while, either through their social media or they'll send us a note once or twice from their guest book. And yeah, they're just the most loving comments. So I think it's quite amazing that they took this risk and made this available to so many people. So the quality of spaces that we see as architects aren't available to everybody. This is an occasion where we've sent potential clients up to stay there. There's people that come up and just want to experience architecture or sort of the luxury spa experience of being there. They have friends around the community that service it, so it's actually been a great economic boom for the community. And it's got a great connection to nature. So even though people are coming from the city, they're immersed in probably the purest wilderness that you could. Like I say, there's a few small cabins, but a lot of the land is just untouched. So friends come up as groups quite often. There's been some amazing videos that we've been sent of people's experience there, including drone shots, just amazing meals being created there. There's not a ton up there. So a lot of stuff people are bringing with them, or it's being special ordered. The people are all finding it, especially in 2020, to be a great retreat. It's, as they say, it's a great way to get away, breathe some fresh air, and not think about the current situation for a weekend or a week. So the hiking trails, they start at the house, loop around the site. They take you to Mud Lake as well as the main lake. So they have 2 docks. They have a lot of things for kids. So a lot of families are coming up and staying, which is great to see, great for them to experience. A lot of couples have been going up for special occasions. So we've seen quite a few social media proposals or just getaways, which has been quite awesome to see. So you usually don't, social media is interesting because you really don't get that insight into your projects very often. So to be able to follow it through so many people and so many different eyes has been tremendous. We created a little bunk area for the kids. So their daughter could invite her friends over, but also guests could come and stay. What we've discovered through social media is it's quite popular with young adults as well. So it's even though there's amazing master bedroom and adult bedrooms, almost half the guests, I think, end up with at least a few pictures of them in the bunk beds. So it's kind of fun. The bathroom for the master bath is quite amazing because of the remoteness. You're able to open it up to nature. So here the master bathroom tub opening up to the views, but also they had experienced an furrowed tub in their travels. So they brought us a sketch, which was from memory of what they experienced as far as how they stepped down and how the tub was located and the heights and depths of things. And they asked us to recreate a similar experience for them here. So we found a spot at the end of the master bath that we could screen in as an enclosure. So you have the water coming in. People are able to use it out there in the snow or in the summer, and it's quite private and quite a unique experience. So I'd say that's one of the highlights of probably memories on the site. Not only the exploration and discovery, but the sort of pampering that people are able to get so far from where they would expect it in the city. So the furrowed tub is here in the foreground. You can see the master bath directly behind it. And the way we've situated everything, it's up against the stone bluff. So even from the hiking trails, you're not able to get a view into it. So it's, even though you can have all of your friends being active around the main house, you still have this really cozy spot in the rear of the house. So we do hope to make sure the Essex Library has a copy of our latest book, if not all of our books. So if you're local, go see Anne as soon as things open up. And if not, certainly support your local bookstore and get your own copy if you'd like. So our book was released, our latest book was released in 2019, the end of 2019, with high hopes for 2020. Ironically, we labeled it Gathering. So that didn't happen as much as we would like, but it did open up a whole series of discussions with interesting people about what that means in the current time. So we're at the end of that series. As we go into 2021, we're sort of exploring some deeper detail on some of those things. I also put on here the link to the bear stand. If you're interested in seeing more images of that, or if you want to go stay up there, it's really a beautiful site and a beautiful location. And as I say, it's quite unique. So I can't think of anything else like it. So with that, and I don't know if you have collected any questions, or if there's anything that folks may want to ask or see more of.
Not collected questions, but if anybody has a question, please unmute and shout it out. I have two things I want to say. One is thank you for an incredible show, Robert. We knew it was going to be enjoyable, but nobody could tell how just how enjoyable that was. I feel completely relaxed looking at these homes, and it's clear that BCJ is not just designing houses, but they're designing homes for people to not gather in, obviously, but also really
the site though, isn't that incredible?
just
Jeez.
incredible.
Wow.
It must be.
incredible.
I mean, look at that.
Yeah,
house.
Jackson, yeah.
My second comment is
Oh, that's this is like
Oh, that
unbelievably.
must be where he lives. Okay.
Anybody who wants to shout out a question, please go ahead and do so. Gail, did you have something?
No, sorry.
All right.
I was pointing at the screen. Sorry.
Oh. Robert, can you tell me what the black siding is on the bear stand on the facades?
Yeah, so it's cedar siding, but there's a Scandinavian finish, which is a pine tar finish. And it's interesting because when we were doing the research, there's a lot of people have tried to make pine tar finishes, and not all of them have been successful. So Nick was convinced that he should go right to the source, and we imported some finish from Sweden. And what we discovered in our research is that you want to be really careful in specifying it, because the original intent of it was for hunting boar. So they would take this and they'd go out in the woods and they would paint a tree with this pine tar finish, and the wild boars would come up and rub against the trees to get oil on their coats, and then they would hunt them. And they still offer that particular variety, as well as house paint. So, so if you ordered the wrong thing, I don't know what would happen. But it's called Svartjärden, and we used a black finish, and it's been incredibly durable. So it's been, as I say, it's been up 10 years. There's a few areas that are probably about ready to be recoated. It's recommended that you reapply in 3 to 4 years just to get a more durable coat, but it builds up durability over the years. So each time you can leave it on longer and longer before you reapply some touch up.
Wow,
That's probably way more than you wanted to know.
No, not at all. It's actually perfect. It's a stunning finish. Did you, I assume you explored a lot of different ways of creating a black facade. And I also assume, looking at the house in Hawaii, that you got to eat a lot of local food in your campouts down there.
I'll tell you, we seem to find the kindest and gentlest clients, but our owners at Wailupe are truly exceptional. So when we were staying in the small shack, they were bringing these amazing meals. When we were working on the studio, we were having, as I say, meals that were collected off the roof, and they would have parties. They have an amazing sculpture, which we helped with on from James Turrell. So when that opened up, when we got the lighting adjusted and everything was just perfect, they threw an amazing party at the pool. And we all got to sit around and enjoy the James Turrell. But in the meantime, they were serving great appetizers and and such, only later to learn that it was tilapia out of the aquaponics, and it was, peppers from their garden, and everything came off of their 2 sites. And it was the most lovely party. And yeah, it was really eye-opening in sort of how self-sufficient you can be if you really want to.
Anybody in the audience have
I,
questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Robert, I got a hint of it when you were talking about the house in Hawaii, but I'm curious how you work with clients. They come to you and they have let's say the bear stand project. Did they have an image in mind? I mean, it's so beautiful how it connects to the land, but was there a back and forth? Did they come to you and say, hey, give you a bunch of pictures on Pinterest and say, hey, could we have some of this and that? How do you go back and forth and develop it with them?
Jim, is you've probably experienced it. It varies dramatically between clients. But what we do is we try to sit down and have a really good dialogue with them from the very beginning and try to understand sort of what their background is and what might resonate with them. So we've had clients give us the most amazing picture books. The Bear Stand was one of those. They gave us a book that, and if I saw it in the library, I would be impressed. It had just great text and stories and examples of things they liked and wanted to achieve, but not specific. It wasn't a specific solution. It was a character that they wanted to capture. Others, we've had folks who were writers who would just write stories about sort of how they grew up, things that they remember from childhood that they appreciate. So it sort of gave you a background or insight into who they were and what they felt was important. And then they let it up to us to sort of turn that into some sort of an architectural form, certainly with back and forth. But and then we have
how does that
client,
back and forth work? When so you show them something and they go, I don't know. What's your experience with that, the back and forth?
Well, as you probably see, our work varies quite a bit from client to client. And that's that dialogue of, spending a lot of time together whenever possible. Of course, that's much more challenging now. So the projects we're starting now have changed sort of how we do that. But spending a lot of time together, showing different options. We involve them in the process of sort of solving the problem of how things fit on the site. For instance, at Wailupe, the Hawaii project, we were actually rolling out, we had plywood tables on sawhorses in the caretaker shack. And the clients would come over and we'd spend the entire day together just drawing real time with them on tracing paper. And we would explain the process of our observations about where the breezes were coming from. So why you would want to, have the house positioned a certain way. They would relate their experiences that, they had on the site and things that, they liked about views or things that might happen throughout the year or things that may happen throughout the day that they like. For instance, I remember the owner really liked that there was a low fence along the property, along the surf access, because he would see people carrying these really colorful surfboards and they would be bopping along the top of the fence. And he would just be so mesmerized by that as an artist that, he said, I really want to be able to sit, on what was now the lanai and sort of watch that activity sort of flow along and see people going out and flowing into the ocean. So there's those moments that we're able to capture that really make it personal. So it's really about that dialogue and trying to listen to what they're saying, trying to help interpret what they've experienced and what they appreciate into a story. I think the danger sometimes is we some clients come with a very preconceived notion about what something would be. That's a little bit tougher because you want to sort of explore it together and sort of find a solution. But but over time. So a slow process.
Robert, I think that one of the things that your office does that you do is, the fact that you give the if it's a couple or you usually give them a questionnaire, separate questionnaires, so they can answer to, what is it that they want. And it's interesting how when they combine and they review those questionnaires, how different and what are the spaces that they're using or want to use.
Yeah.
So you have to.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, we do for couples. We ask them to fill out information separately quite often, and then we compare it together, and it's quite an eye opener because their perceptions are often quite different, and the dynamic in a maybe a normal situation is they accommodate each other, and we're able to come in as a designer and say it's not either or. We might be able to accommodate both, and 9 times out of 10 combining both makes a really interesting and innovative solution. So we really find energy in that, and it's also, I have to say, it's a bit entertaining because the expressions that you see on people's faces, you sort of go through and talk about things, and it's like, you like what? It can be, yeah, it can be quite interesting. And then you see the dialogue and the dynamic, and that gives you insight as well, just in how those discussions unfold. So.
Are house clients more difficult than your library clients? Just saying.
I think you picked 2 of my favorite clients. So I love residential. We've made a really strong effort to keep roughly 50% of our work, at least here in Seattle, is residential. And that can be a struggle. It doesn't always make the best business sense, but it's a passion that we want to do. Library projects are interesting too, because librarians make great clients because they're so engaged and knowledgeable and organized. I find the process to go quite well. And then for the community, everybody loves libraries, so I'm not sure you can go wrong. So I shouldn't tell you that as a librarian, but it makes our job quite easy. So you hope you're doing exceptional work, but yeah, libraries are just really loved institutions. So.
Well, I can recommend everybody who's listening or listening in the future that a visit to the Ballard Library in Seattle is a very different experience than many libraries you'll go into, and it's a tremendous pleasure. It's not a huge library, but it's beautifully laid out, and it's incredibly comfortable to be in. It's a joy to inhabit that space.
That's very cool.
Toddler or an adult. Any other questions? Please don't hesitate to shout out. While you're thinking about your question, I will say, please join us again on December 4th at 7 o'clock. It's another Friday night Centerbrook Architects lecture. And this time we will have a friend of Robert Miller's, Takashi Yanai from Los Angeles will be joining us. He's at the Ehrlich Yanai Ray Cheney office. And Takashi has been designing some also breathtakingly beautiful homes both in LA and the surrounding area down there, but they've also branched out up now into San Francisco. So he will be showing us some of the homes that they have designed, and it will be another eye-filling evening. So please join us for that. Again, it's registration required, so put that in your calendar and join us. And Nick Deaver, who designs mostly residences in Austin, Texas, will be joining us in January. And I remember having a chat with Nick one time where he said, I will not design a house if both of the couple don't sit down together with me. He would not design with one or the other of the couple. They both had to be there in the process. So is that something that you require? It has to be both?
Well, we actually requested the whole family is there. So it's quite interesting. We're doing a little house now down in Gold Hill, which is in the top of the mountain at Crystal Mountain Ski Resort. And it's a client that we designed a house for quite a few years ago. And they're doing a little resort sort of getaway cabin, just a little 1,000 square foot construct. And so we know the kids quite well, and we designed these great little lofts for their bedrooms, which they love. And that she sent me just last week sketches from both kids of what they thought the house should have. So they were laying out floor plans, and it was amazing. Like the one kid who was capturing space under the stair, like really great 3-dimensional grass, which is terrific. And the other student did his, or other kid did his on the back of his math homework. So she had to wait for it to be returned from the teacher so she could show it to me. But yeah, I think the insights of the kids are just as important. And a lot of the projects that we're doing are seen as sort of projects that would be inherited by the kids. So the parents want them to be a part of that. The first project that I showed you, the project in Whistler, the owner's son was interested in architecture while we were designing that project. So he was quite quiet, but you could tell he was engaged. He then went on to architecture school in London, and then came to work for us as an intern for a year in Seattle. And he's now working again in Europe for an architectural firm and doing extraordinary work. So yeah, so it's kind of nice to think that we're having an impact on the entire family, and the kids are such a big part of that. Our preference, of course, is to have everybody there. So
That's a great story. All right.
I have another question, one last one. I remember, she will remain nameless, but a really good architect that people really respect, really great work, made the comment that architecture is not democratic. I took it to mean that to achieve something that's really beautiful and really stunning, you can't have a democratic dialogue. It's sort of, that leads to a camel. That's sort of this running commentary. And I think you guys seem to find a way. I'm just curious how you deal with this, where somebody's got an idea, but or you get pushed and pulled, and yet you manage to create something that's really beautiful, but it's responding to what people want and desire. It feels democratic to me, and yet it's not a mess. Do you ever think about that?
Well, it's interesting. We have a client who we are just finishing a house for, and when he knocked on our door 6 years ago, his statement was that architecture is not a team sport. So he wanted to know who, singular, he was going to be working with. And in the process, he's realized that in fact it is a team sport. So he's equally engaged with probably 6 people in the office, and has the same level of discussion with all of them. And I think what it is the way that we approach a design problem is it's really problem solving. So I'd like to think that when we walk a client through the rationale about how we arrived at a solution, that it's something that they can also buy into. I think it's probably a little different if you're trying to do form making, or if you have sort of a specific solution in mind from day one.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, if our work were very consistent, I think that would be useful, because people could look at our website and know exactly what they were going to get, and we would know there's an alignment. With the variety of work, it makes it much tougher to market, and a lot more trust is required from the client that will do something that fits them. So I really appreciate folks, taking that leap of faith with us. But I suspect that may also narrow down the demographic of who we work with, which is one of the reasons I like exploring things like the day do and things that may be a little bit more accessible to a broader range of people that, maybe, spending their life savings to achieve something that, their kids will inherit eventually. So.
Great observation.
I wanted to ask a quick question. Thank you very much. It's been really lovely looking at your work. These spaces are often large, windowed, glassed, but so my question is about how you're tackling energy. Are you using a lot of solar? Have you experimented with that a lot? What is your approach to heating and cooling these huge spaces?
Yeah, I will say it varies. Over the years, we've probably spent less time looking at the energy usage of buildings than we do now. For sure, it's certainly increased. We're currently working on the house I mentioned at Gold Hill. We're working with BC Passive House, for instance. So we're designing a home in tandem with them. They will fabricate all of the walls and panels and ship that down to us to be installed on the site. So, and we're having more and more clients that have that interest, and we are developing more tools to make that happen. So, so I think that's a good example of where we see the future going. It's a difficult site; it's not easily approachable. So the prefabricated system works well. We can ship it down from BC on a truck and install it in a day or two on a local foundation. But other homes, yeah, there's some homes with very large glass where we're trying to balance the experience and the usage. We have a home in Aspen which has a ton of glass, maybe one of our glassier homes. It actually went through the LEED certification process and has good energy performance. It was also using the Capifari window system, so we were able to get really good glazing in it. And then a lot of solar, as you mentioned earlier, to compensate. So I don't know if that starts to answer your question, but.
Yeah, it just must be an ongoing challenge sort of to solve that in some of these areas like the one we're looking at right now. I don't know where you'd find solar, but yeah, it's just an interesting dialogue to have with, like, as you're designing, how do we and looking at the site itself, those challenges.
Well, it's interesting. We're also doing a much better job, I think, of collecting data on energy usage. And it varies client by client. We find some of the private clients are actually way more willing to share it than public institutions. So we are, trying to circle back around and talk to clients and see what the usage is, and then compare that to energy modeling to see, see where we stand. So it's definitely a learning process.
Yeah.
What did you use in Whistler?
I'm sorry, in Whistler? We did energy modeling in Whistler. There we have geothermal wells. So the first thing we did is we went in and built geothermal wells. Then we have quite a bit of the building is super insulated. There's quite a bit of it that's tucked into the earth. So as I mentioned, those light cannons bring some light down into some lower spaces. So the actually outdoor skin versus the square footage there is rather low, considering the impression of the transparency that you see in those images.
Any other questions?
Just, do you see any other changes in design based on the pandemic? Like, ventilation and heating?
Well, I think it's, obviously things have lasted much longer than anybody anticipated. So one would assume that that's not going to go away any quicker than it will when it does. It most likely will be around possibly forever. So, and if not, there's probably other future pandemics to consider. So, We are doing a lot more collaborations to talk about ventilation and pressurization of buildings. We're looking at surfaces. We have some custom hardware that we designed, which some of you may remember the Reveal hardware. It's now been transferred to Sun Valley Bronze, and bronze tends to be an antimicrobial. So at the very beginning of this, my first call was to them and saying, you know, there's this interesting research I ran across, and next thing I knew, they had it on their website of the copper content of a lot of their products, and they'd done their own research about the benefits of that. So yeah, I think it's interesting. I mentioned before this talk, chatting casually with Jim and Ann, that we're seeing a lot better connection between our 6 offices. So a lot of the research that has been done over the years is becoming much more accessible. And the rate at which we're spreading information and learning between the offices is exponentially increasing. So there's at least 3 instances today where I went on to onto our shared site to look at product information for Vols Stone, which some of you were there recently. The quarry, we had some quality issues to talk about there. Looking for things as simple as standards for a custom mailbox for a home we designed in Hawaii a while back. In the old days, of course, you'd be calling up and hoping somebody would answer the phone. And nowadays, it's we're posting the stuff and it's showing up in milliseconds, which is yeah, for an old timer like me, is really impressive. So, I will share, Jim, another interesting thing. You asked about process. We're finding that with working remote, we're starting to post Miro boards with project information that people can log in who may not even be involved in the project, but other teams, and see what's being produced and what types of graphics and information we're dealing with. And that's also opened up some really interesting dialogue. They're welcome to go in and leave comments in the Miro board or the mural board. And that's sort of an ongoing design discussion. So that's been quite fun. Yeah.
Put drawings up and then people, I don't know, post notes on it.
Yeah, you can post notes, you can draw on it electronically. Yeah.
It's fun.
And so far, it's all been quite friendly and positive. So
Teamwork.
yeah, good teamwork. Yeah. Well, all of these, as you know, all of these projects are just, it really comes down to the team and such an amazing team we have between the 6 offices. So
it's the best part.
Really lucky. Really
good
lucky.
band. You got a good band.
Absolutely.
Well, if there are no other questions, I will give a Tom Rossiter deep bow to Robert.